with that, let's do a quick round of intros. We've got our team here from Team Genius. I'm Chris Knutson, the co-founder and CEO of the company. I know we've got a number of customers on the call, but just in case you're not familiar with Team Genius, we are a player evaluation software company. So we help organizations with evaluations like tryouts, player feedback, camps, and are kind of working into the player development space where we're working on showing how players can progress over time, teaching them actually how to get better, not just sharing feedback, but showing them what they can do to improve and really enabling clubs to do those things with the help of mobile and web tools instead of kind of the traditional paper, spreadsheets, clipboard, all that stuff. So that's a little about us. I've also got Gabe Skelly here from my team. Many of you, if you're a customer, you probably know Gabe. He is the face of our customer success team in many ways. You probably see videos from him, and he takes care of our customers, does a lot of training. I see a hi Ruth shout out. Yeah, I mean, I know many of you are familiar with the team here, and that's a nice segue into Ruth. Ruth is on our customer success team as well. So training and supporting our customers. She also runs her own organization called Go, where she does governance and operations consulting and facilitation for youth sports organizations. So Ruth has a wealth of knowledge, has been in the youth sports space for most of her career. So I'm really glad to have her here with us again this week. And then I will actually let Jennifer introduce herself really quickly. And I know we've got Cory too. And Jennifer, let's start with you. Just a real quick intro, please.
Yes, Jennifer Pivnick, president of U.S. Sports Club Insurance, which is sport fee insurance. We insure the registration costs for competitive sports.
Great. And Cory.
Hi, I'm Cory. I'm the president at Arete Sport, which runs Team Unreal and Frog Lacrosse.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Awesome. Well, let's get started here. So again, I want to encourage you at any time, jump into the chat, share a comment, a question. If we're not making sense or you want anyone to elaborate on a point, please just call it out there. And even better, if you want to jump into the conversation, which we really, really encourage, that'll make this much more interesting for everyone. Just use the little hand raise function. You should see it on your screen. That will let us know you want to participate, and there's a quick click for us to allow you to mute and unmute yourself, and then you can jump into the conversation at any time. So let's use for starters, we had a number of people submit questions or topics ahead of time. So I'm going to just read through that list really quickly so people have a sense of kind of the scope of some of the topics that were suggested for today. But we will cover those, but we also, this is meant to be just sort of a free-flowing conversation. I mean, we're all really in this together, including us at Team Genius. If you're not doing well as a youth sports organization, we're not doing well either. So we really are in this together and want to provide a place where we can just ask and answer questions and share ideas. So without further ado, a few questions here that were submitted. So we had a couple around, virtual training. That's been a consistent topic. It's come up on, the last 2 weeks of us doing this. So we'll definitely cover that. We have about, players staying motivated and positivity. So how do you keep your players engaged? And that's not just from a training standpoint, but just how do you keep a positive message, keeping people, encouraged. And I think especially with kids, many of whom can be, potentially scared right now or obviously missing the sport that they love. And what can you be doing as an organization to help with that? And we have, some very, kind of let's get real about what's going on in terms of realistic timelines for return to play and when that might be. And then what the implications are long-term in terms of, financial implications, pay to play models. How are we, our organizations moving forward with their seasons? Even with sort of uncertainty, are they starting to collect registration fees and that sort of thing? We also have a couple points about, contingency plans. So how are you, preparing for a complete cancellation of the season? What if we can't play this year at all? How are you thinking about managing that and preparing for it in case that the worst case does happen there? Last one that I see here was really about, player eligibility and just, if you were in sort of your last year to play in, your final season, senior in high school, for example, what are the alternatives? What can we do? Is there, thoughts around how, as a youth sports community, how we might be able to handle that or help with that? So I'm going to just pause for a second. If you have other questions you want to jump in, of course, live or through the chat, just take a minute, think about if you have any other questions, and then we'll start jumping into these. All right, so I'm going to keep going here, and by all means, jump in anytime with other questions. I think maybe a good place to start is on a positive note, which is really about the positivity. So, specifically, there have been some conversations, and I know this theme was present the last couple of weeks as well. Social, mental, cognitive well-being. How are people using maybe their social channels, the coaches themselves, to really be leaders, not only for sport, but also just helping young people through this time. And so this is a really big question and probably a lot of ideas, but I would love to hear a couple ideas on what people are doing to stay positive and keep kids, engaged and try to, provide some light in the dark time that this is. And you know what? I'm going to put you on the spot, Skelly, because I know you were telling me some good things about what you've been doing, even at home with your kids, keeping them positive. And I know we talked earlier and you were out for a walk around the block, but, yep. Would love to hear, share what you've been doing. And also, I know you've been talking with a ton of our customers. What are you hearing people do trying to stay positive right now?
Yeah. So, anybody that doesn't talk to me on a regular basis, I've got 4 kids, which you'll hear in the background some of the time. I think, as parents, we have to make sure that everybody knows that, like, everybody's working from home for the most part worldwide. You're going to hear kids in the background running around doing things. And so, internally, we need to manage our ability to stay positive and just let people know, like, that little bit of, little bit less professionalism sometimes in some of our meetings, because we've got kids in the background. And that's probably 95% of the organizations I talk to. Keeping those kids, like, if you've got kids of your own, or if you've got kids in the organizations, keeping them motivated is a big thing. And a big thing in keeping them motivated is, a couple big things, keeping the exercise going, giving them some kind of things they can do at home with the tools that they've got at home. So being able to go outside and do different drills, body weight drills, plyometric drills, things that really build them as an overall athlete that they can do when they're at home and that are fun. Giving them ways to maybe, time those and show how many they've done so they can improve on those as the weeks go by that they're, at home and doing these things at home. And a huge part of that is sunlight. Really staying positive. There's a lot of psychological benefits of sunlight that you can see proven just about everywhere. Just getting outside. So, like, for me personally, I try to get outside for, a half an hour walk or do meetings as I can. I got Zoom installed on my phone, so sometimes I'll do meetings just walking around so I get some sunlight outside. But get the kids outside. They're inside, some going crazy doing, education from home. And as youth sports organizations, we can give them tools to, hey, get outside, do, 30 minutes of drills or do 15 minutes of drills. Here's 10 things you can do for, a minute at the most high intensity interval you can. See how many of these repetitions you can get done. Kids love that kind of stuff. It gets their heart really going. It gets their mind going. And especially if they can get outside, then it really gets them, into that positive attitude for the rest of their day. If it's going to be during the school day where they're going back to studying or whatever else they're going to do the rest of their day. But, getting their heart going, getting some drills going and being outside are a huge thing when it's, you're basically locked in, not being able to see people outside of your immediate, friends and family. So.
I would say from, like, having a teenager perspective, I can't really require that, or I can encourage them to do it, but they are a little bit more resistant to stuff like that unless it's, required by their coach. But what we started doing is talking about at least 3 things every day that they're grateful for. Like, really putting a focus on gratitude right now, because they want to hang out with their friends and they want to, they don't want to be locked in the house anymore. So that's really kind of helped change the attitude around here a little bit. So it's a simple practice, but sometimes the small things are important.
We have a challenge here in that, you know, everyone's working at home and the neighbor has a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, and they don't understand that daddy's an engineer and needs to focus. And so, and I have a dog. And so once a day, the 4-year-old and the 6-year-old come over and pick up the dog on the leash, and they get to stay in the yard, but they all get to go for a big walk. And the puppy and the kids all get to just let all the wiggles out. And it buys their dad a little bit of quiet time.
Thank you. And Kelly, it looks like you joined us here. Feel free to hit the unmute button and chime in anytime.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Hi, Kelly.
We can hear you.
Yes.
Hello. Hey, so a couple of things that we're doing at our club to try to keep positive is, I like the grateful part. We did that as well with a lot of the kids, but we added in also that they needed to type in their team chat every morning. What is one goal that you have for your day? And we talked to them about SMART goals and kind of setting those goals. And it doesn't even have to be sport related. It can be anything, school, exercise, just in general, spending time with family. That's something that we thought was good. And then we also added in a challenge of like being helpers. How do you find the helpers, right? So how can they be the helpers in their communities? What are some ways they can do that with practicing social distancing, obviously, but what are some ways that they can help too? And I found that a lot of the kids get super excited about it, and they're really, see a lot of smiles when you talk to them on the Zoom. It's pretty cool.
I love that. I think that's great.
Thank you.
You know, one thing that I've also seen from not so much the youth side, but a lot of the national governing bodies and like the U.S. Soccer Federation is offering free education for coaches to really help improve, you know, their time of when they don't have what they can normally do, and free resources for just high performance players, just different resources that they can, you know, increase their education. So I like that too.
I think I shared this last week. There's a coach I talked to last week who he sets up a Zoom call for his team. I think they're like 11-year-old boys. But every Monday and Thursday when they normally would practice, it's at practice time. He sets up the Zoom, the kids all dial in. He says something coach-like for 5 or 10 minutes, and then he leaves. And the kids get an hour to do whatever 11-year-old boys like to do together. And then he comes back at the end of the hour and kind of wraps it up. And so whatever those boys need to talk about or need to do, they get to do together at the same time. So it sort of keeps that rhythm of their week, even though they're not on the field together.
I've seen a couple clubs just that are using, you know, free tools in a nice way, where YouTube's got some abilities where if you follow a certain organization, maybe the club that you're part of or the kids that are, you know, working well with that club, they can schedule to have live training events. And I've seen a couple of clubs using this where they have the kids follow their YouTube channel and they have, like, say 2:00 Central, they're going to go live with training for half an hour. And so they know every single day they're going to be able to log on wherever they are on YouTube and do that live training with the coaches from their club.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's good. I think those are great answers, good ideas. Definitely like the positivity, gratitude, and being the helper idea is great. I know we have I think that's maybe a good transition, kind of a related topic in a way, is the remote training, which is of course about, you know, keeping skills up, trying to improve, of course, but just stay active and engaged in the game. And that's been a constant theme. The tryouts, you know, webinar we did a few weeks ago was pretty hot on that. We've had a lot of our customers, you know, asking us and working with our tools to do that. And I think we had at least 3 people submit questions ahead of this discussion on that. So let's go there. And I see Christopher Uppington in the chat here, you know, Zoom skill, tactical sessions, Kahoot. That's not what I'm familiar with, but for tactical scenarios, created YouTube channel for skills of the day, recorded by your players and coaches. Yeah, that's great. Who wants to tackle this one? Does anyone want to kind of share a couple ideas of what they've seen? I know this is, like I said, a really hot topic. Cory, yeah, I got a little feedback from you, Cory, so I muted you. I'm gonna unmute you there.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, you're good. Jump in.
Cool. So, each of our coaches, we have 8 teams at Frog. So I'll just focus on Frog for explaining this. So one thing we're doing is we have the Zoom sessions like a normal practice, like was mentioned earlier, but I'm also doing podcasts for players and parents, just updating them on what I'm seeing happening with everything going on. And then what I'm working on in the background for my coaches is progression drills that kids can do at their house with, with the tools they have. So the main thing I'll be doing next week is trying to figure out what players have access to. So who has nets, who has balls, and then creating plans by breaking it into those groupings. So kids with minimal resources, we want to create a progression for them that makes sense. And then kids who have more tools that have the bounce back and have the nets, they can maybe do a different progression that we could build out for them too. So the longer we're in this, the more detailed we're trying to get. And we're trying to tackle it not just from Zoom meetings of coaches, but directors play a part, and then the team coaches play a part as well. And then one thing we're going to do too is do education for our coaches. So I'm putting coaching philosophy webinars together, and then I'm doing, hey parents, I'm doing a webinar on how you can. Parents are going to talk on the sideline during games, so I'm trying to teach them how to talk during games that mimic what the coaches say at practice and what they say during games. So if the parents are going to scream, at least they know what we're expected to say from us. So I'm going to do a webinar purely on here's what you should be yelling out during a game if you're going to decide to yell out. So we're trying to get really detailed and attack it from a webinar standpoint, Zoom, podcast, and then I'm looking at course software to build those progressions into for our players depending on the resources they have.
I like that approach of considering the resource constraint, because I think that's not always considered, but there's probably a huge variety across any organization, especially when you're talking hundreds of kids and families, very different circumstances and sort of resources at their disposal. So that's a really good lens to look at it in.
I really like that you're sharing that context to discuss with the parents too. And so I think if other clubs and organizations are looking for that, Positive Coaches Alliance has a lot of articles that they could, pull from to share some of that content instead of kind of, reinventing the wheel. There's a lot of resources out there to just pull from and share. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I'm gonna write that down.
And how are people involving the parents in that remote training at all? Is there, is everything going right to the player, or are organizations really focused on kind of working through the parent to say, hey, here's what we're trying to accomplish with this remote training, and here's the philosophy and everything? What are people doing there? Are they kind of just going right to the players, or is there kind of a strategy for getting parents kind of engaged in that process?
I saw a club in California had a really cool thing that they put on their website, how they're approaching the COVID-19, and they put a Google Doc up that are allowing parents to submit questions. And then the DOCs are recording a webinar to answer those questions that they're posting once a week just to keep the parents engaged and updated, but they're answering the questions that the parents submitted. I loved that idea. I thought it was great.
Yeah, we do something similar on our Sports U, and then the podcast is just whatever topics interest the parents. We write it down, and then based on popularity, that's where the webinars I will do based on the curiosities they have. Not just with COVID-19, but also just with what do you want to know about lacrosse? Or, basically learn about maybe the coaches or more in depth, almost a community and social aspect too. It's not always just about lacrosse. It's how do we keep kids engaged? There's other things that happen, obviously, in a club outside of just playing the sport, the hotels and the practice and the community in that sense. So getting creative just to create opportunities for kids to not get bored at home all day and trying to figure out unique avenues to do that.
Excellent. Yeah, I know that's really good, everyone. I just want to give one more second before we change topics here. Scott Anderson, on the topic of involving parents in remote player development, local hockey association is holding skills challenges that require the parents to sign off on the player completing the challenge. Yeah, that makes sense. But but yeah, I love the idea of just, doing the, the Q&A with parents. I mean, that seems like they're kind of a gatekeeper to a lot of this, and it makes sense to keep them engaged.
Again, as I say, if anybody wants to join in via the conversation with your voice, just raise your hand in the raise hand feature, and we can put your voice on here too.
Right. Cynthia has another one from her youth league. Our youth league has hosted former players at the college and even international level of play for a question and answer session. It's driven by the board and the coaches, but the players and parents are all on Zoom and they can ask questions beforehand or in the chat.
Another really good thing that I've seen a couple clubs working on coordinating and organizing is the high school players offering to help with homework for the elementary and junior high kid players and trying to pair them up because the parents are busy working, and a little big sister, big brother, little brother kind of program.
Great. Well, go ahead, Ruth. Yeah, I was going to maybe move to another topic, but I don't want to leave this one if there's still
I was just knowing that Ryan was asking if Jennifer had a link to where the parent Google Doc that you had talked about. I don't know how private that is for that club.
Let me look on what club that was. Hold on.
I know for me as a parent that's got, kids that are younger, my kids range in age from kindergartners to 11th graders. Anything under my 11th grader, so my 6th grader would pretty much need to have a lot of that stuff go through me as far as, communicating with the kids and just making sure they're on to see the communication and then following up with that. So I think, it's important to keep the parents engaged in this, remote training education as well. And then I like the feedback aspect with having the parents be somewhat liable for making sure the kids are doing it and checking off on it.
Chris, did you see Scott's other question?
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going to go here. So this is, sorry, I just pasted it over here for me so I can see it. So another question here from Scott, and let's say, so assuming our local governments allow us to return to play, what rule changes or measures are associations planning to take to minimize the risk of virus spread? So yeah, putting the umpire behind the pitcher, changing out balls more frequently, kids out of the dugout. Yeah, this is a really interesting one, and frankly, I have really no expertise here. I'm very curious what others are hearing or thinking about in their circles.
There we go. As far as when we're going to get back online, or what the protocol will be when we get back online.
Yeah, what people are going to do once they get going again.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're going to have to enforce some type of social distancing. It'll probably go back to recommendations of, not having groups larger than 10. I think that everyone's afraid, and it's going to be a slow process back. It's not going to be just, rip the Band-Aid off and everybody goes back, because otherwise what would be the point? The numbers are going to spike sky high again, and then we'll all go back on lockdown. So it makes the most sense to do it in a strategic, slow fashion and kind of see if things start to taper off. Hopefully it's true that the heat affects everything, and the summer months coming up, it slows everything down too. I just don't see us.
I hope so.
Back. Yeah.
Yeah. Steve, looks like you joined us. Is this a topic you have some ideas on, or? And sorry, you're on mute, Steve. I'm just going to hit unmute on you. There you go.
Is that better?
Yep.
Okay. That's one of the things I've been focusing on, because we've got a little bit different structure here at Michigan Elite, where I've got a full staff that focuses 100% of their time on the kids. And it's one of the owners who's not involved day to day on the court focused things. One of the things we are looking at is what is going to happen when we have to unpack this. And Jennifer, I agree with you. I think they're going to take us out of this the way they've taken us into it, where it started off with no more than 50 people, no more than 25, down to a shelter in place. And then they're slowly going to take us back out of this as we come out. As a lot of youth sports work, a lot of times tournaments are run, and teams cross state lines. So every state's operating a little bit differently. Most of the ones here in the Midwest are all on shelter in place. So we're all kind of in the same thing. Here in Michigan, schools have canceled for the year. We're locked down till April 30th, but we have a large tournament coming up in May that we've rescheduled from mid-April. And we're looking at even things like, okay, we have a building that's going to have 54 courts in it. There's no way we're going to have 54 courts crammed with people all over the place, and 10,000 people in the facility. We're going to have to look at, we're in 3 different segmented buildings, maybe reducing or cutting in half the number of courts. Are we going to have to look at providing some sort of cleaner for the volleyball between each match on an ongoing basis for our facilities? We're even looking at and doing demos on ultraviolet C light disinfecting machines that they've got one we're looking at that's actually like a floor scrubber. So we would still clean the floor, but then nightly go through and run the ultraviolet light over it, which would completely disinfect it of bacteria and everything else, as well as some sort of mechanism to potentially put the balls into a room with an ultraviolet light, because the balls will get ruined if we're wiping them down every night with a Lysol
bleach
type of wipe. And I don't know that we could get that many at the store right now anyways. So we're looking at some technological advances to allow us to potentially obviously keep things clean, but potentially also do some disinfecting at the same time.
I think that's a great idea. The other thing that you could add to that maybe is live streaming the games and then limit the number of parents that can attend. So you can maybe have the same number of courts, but just maybe the coach, the manager, and 5 lucky parents or something, Yeah,
we've got an agreement with Baller TV for our tournament to come in. And that's one thing that we are considering, again, depending on what the stipulations are when the tournament happens. Again, if that ends up happening, it might be a no spectator type of event. And we've got actually a new facility that we're building in conjunction with a local community college that we're doing that specifically. We're putting in live streaming on every court. So we've got that capability that if this does end up lengthening out, we could do some things where parents or spectators aren't allowed, but they could still see everything.
I think that the side effect of all of this is going to be technology is going to be extremely more important in youth sports than it was ever before. I think parents are going to demand it. I think it's going to be more of an ingrained part of every club and organization, and there's just not going to be any getting around it moving forward. That includes the tryout process and player evaluations.
See what you did there.
See, I was going to say, I have heard the idea of that as things start to resume in some of the states that may open up before other ones, letting the kids play the games, but not having spectators. So kind of around Steve's idea where just having it so that you have smaller amounts, right? So the kids are there, not in huge groupings, but they don't have huge amounts of fans. And then that does lead into, having to have it live streamed so the parents and friends can still watch everything, but smaller groupings and the players actually on the fields.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Gary, it looks like you joined us. Sorry, go ahead, Steve.
No, I was going to say, I think
Gary in.
Yep. As we slow roll out of this too, I don't think we're going to go back to even 50 or 75% of what we could do before. So we're even looking at situations where we might be starting out with just small group practices. Now that our schools are out, we might run practices during the day for some of the older kids that could drive. Again, assuming we're not in a shelter in place order. But those are some of the creative things that I think every club probably across the country is looking at in terms of ways to get these kids back out there in a mode that isn't in mass, where we have a 9-court facility as one of our facilities. There's no way we're going to have 16 or 18 teams, 2 teams a court practicing on those at the same time. I don't think it's safe for the coaches. I don't think it's safe for the kids until there's something more mass readily available in terms of a cure or a vaccine. So it's going to be a slow roll out of this as we move forward.
Well, and I think that goes hand in hand with that is going to be the economic downturn of what we're facing, and really what are the numbers going to be of parents that can actually come back and commit to a program. So I think that, that's a real issue, and what clubs and teams are going to have to also focus on is fundraising opportunities and what they're going to have to do to help offset some of those costs, and making sure that all of the clubs and organizations have a plan in place and know what is available and what's out there to offer that to the teams, the parents, the managers, so that it's available. There's programs that I really like. One of them is called Flip Give. It's like they're big in hockey. Are you familiar with them, Chris? It's like
absolutely, yep.
shopping online right now. Teams can set that up, or clubs can set that up right now, create a scholarship fund, start utilizing some of that, because you could start that now and share it with your parents and members. I like that program.
There's a lot of cool stuff around fundraising. And I think anybody even on right now, like little things to, especially if your organization has a nonprofit designation, go on to Amazon and have everybody in the club, all the parents and players and families do Amazon Smile, and then a percentage of everything they buy goes right back to the organization in cash.
Yeah, FlipGive is that same concept. It just tells you exactly like what that percentage is.
Okay.
I mean, the grocery stores have a similar program as well. There's several that are out there.
We used the FlipGive. We were planning on going to Scotland, which obviously is not happening right now.
Ellie.
Unfortunately.
Bummer.
Yeah, bummer. But that's okay. We'll maybe a different time. But we used it, and it was over Black Friday weekend, and we had close to $2,000 that we earned.
Wow.
Just one.
Awesome.
Yeah. So FlipGive that's a great app to use. Just kind of piggybacking off what you're saying.
And that was for one team, or was that club wide?
No, it was for one team.
Wow.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
That's significant. Yeah.
Right. And not everybody was using it.
Great. Well, anything else on that topic? Just give it a going once, twice.
Chris, one other quick thing that does tie into that, and I think to Jennifer's point, with this economic downturn, there are going to be a lot of families that might not be able to afford to come back to club sports. We're doing some work currently with a group out of San Diego, I believe, Starlings Volleyball, that focuses on trying to provide access to volleyball to underserved kids. We're actually, they're starting up one club here in Detroit, and we're working to partner a new organization as part of Michigan Elite, or kind of a sister club to Michigan Elite, to do the same thing, to allow some kids that haven't had access to volleyball in the past into that. And they provide some sort of scholarship funding to go along with that. Because I've sat in on a couple of Project Play webinars, and one of the things that they've brought up, which is a true fact, is for the first time, there's been a lot of kids that haven't had access to sports, whether it be volleyball, softball, lacrosse, or whatever, due to social economic conditions. We're all in a position now that, out of our control, none of us have access to the youth sports that we're used to participating in on a day-to-day basis. And it's the first time everybody's kind of had a taste of the frustration involved with not being able to get out and play. So I think that's going to open up a lot of people's eyes, and hopefully open up some avenues to get a lot more people involved across a broad spectrum in the youth sports world.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I'm sure we all hope so. Well, great. Let's move on to another topic. I know this one's been, I know it was submitted by a couple people who are here today. And Steve, while we have you, I know you've been following the CARES Act closely. I've got Todd Larson, the co-founder of Team Genius and our product head, on as well, who kind of managed keeping in touch with that, for our business specifically. But I'd love to hear, if anyone wants to take a shot, maybe you, Todd, for starters, just if we can sort of give a quick overview of the CARES Act. And then I think if anyone is seeing, I know we heard from one of our customers today, actually here in Minnesota, that got approved for the PPP loan, and I was very excited about it. We actually did, as a business, just earlier this week, got accepted. So, Todd, maybe a quick overview, and then, of course, the real question is, like, how do we kind of navigate that CARES Act as a sports organization with contractors and volunteers, and how it can be applied specifically, and that's where we hope others can jump in.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Chris. So as everyone knows, the CARES Act was passed by Congress a couple weeks ago Friday, to help both workers that have been laid off and for businesses who are struggling with the economic shutdown. Particularly on the business side, the most interesting part of it is the PPP, the Payroll Protection Program. The goal of this is to give businesses enough cash to keep their employees on staff instead of laying them off, so that when the economy does come back in the foreseeable future, the economy can pick up much faster as, you know, the employees have stayed on staff, they can just jump right back in versus having to rehire, retrain, maybe some businesses entirely shut down, that sort of thing. So the way that the program works is that you apply through a lender and it goes through the Small Business Association, and you fill out a pretty simple form. The main part of it is to look through your payroll records and figure out 2.5 months, or you figure out your average payroll costs, and that includes your salaries plus some state taxes and benefits thrown in. You multiply that by 2.5, and that's the amount of the loan that you qualify for. So given that money up front, from that date, then you start this 8-week period in which all payroll costs that you accumulate during that period, and some other things, including rent and mortgage insurance, adds to, it basically becomes forgiven off the original loan. So for sports clubs, if you can certainly qualify. This is open for businesses, nonprofits, independent contractors, all sorts of workers. So for a sports club, a nonprofit sports club like we're used to dealing with, if you've got paid staff, you can apply for this loan and then keep your coaches on staff. And then after that 8-week period, you can get most of that loan forgiven.
And actually, I'm throwing together a quick poll here. Sorry, Todd. So I'm gonna fire this off.
So
yeah,
I'm gonna
just
throw
to
some more
see,
important points out there.
yeah, keep going.
In that, so this is available through any bank or lender that works through the Small Business Association. Our experience has been that the big banks are actually still trying to get their portal and their application process up, but the small community banks are doing it manually and working with less volume. So if you have a relationship with a small community bank or a credit union that is an SBA lender, I highly recommend that's who you go with, and there's a better chance you're going to get your application through. Now, and that's actually, I watched Trump's press conference today. He actually recommended that people go through community banks because they're having much more success with this. Oh, and the last thing that I want to mention was Trump is going to also ask Congress for another $250 billion for the program. So there was a fixed pot of money. It was $349 billion. As of yesterday, about a third of it was already allocated. So if that money runs out, hopefully Congress will top that off and allow more businesses to take advantage of the program.
Great. It looks like everyone hopefully is seeing a poll here. I haven't used this functionality yet, but thought, hey, let's give it a shot. So I just kicked off a poll about, just getting a sense of how many organizations are taking advantage of this or not planning to. So we'll just give that a minute here. And in the meantime, what's that, Cory?
I was just saying it doesn't let hosts and panelists do it, so I was just going to tell you we have.
Okay.
We have as well.
So have we.
Yeah, same.
All right. Cool. Yeah, right now, pretty good split between, yes. So for the panelists who, I don't know if you guys, can you panelists see the poll at all?
No.
Okay. Yeah, so it just had, has your organization applied for the payroll protection program or disaster loan? Yes, no, we're not going to, or we plan to. So, yeah, so looks like we've got about 14 responses, and let's see, right now we're at 47% yes, 40% no, and 13% we plan to. So pretty good split. Todd, do you have more you want to jump into there? Otherwise, I don't know. Sorry to put you on the spot, Steve. I know you, last time when you were here with us a couple weeks ago, I thought you did one of the best jobs talking about the program and how it applies. I mean, do you have any maybe insight really specifically on the sports organizations components, and are there any kind of, nuances that sports organizations, nonprofits in particular, need to think about?
Yeah, I mean, it's like Todd said, it's you know, he did a nice job of summarizing it, but when you get into the weeds, I've spent literally the last 7 days almost nonstop. Number one, getting our application in. We've been very fortunate in that we had a great relationship with a decent sized regional bank, Fifth Third, and they included us in an initial beta program, and we applied Sunday, got our documents Monday, and got the funds on Tuesday. So we like blew through that. I've talked to several clubs across the country that are having issues and are at various stages. So from a business perspective, the sports club isn't really unique in the sense that it's looking at your payroll, looking at healthcare, looking at taxes and things like that, and getting that submitted. Some of the nuances that come up in the youth sports industry is that we tend to staff a little differently than most normal corporations, in that it's either almost exclusively independent contractors, or there's a heavy mix of independent contractors, you know, along with maybe a full-time staff. And it's, again, it differs by club. When you get into the nuances of the fact that, yes, an independent contractor can apply as their own independent business, a lot of the 1099s you deal with aren't set up as separate corporations. They're basically a person that just gets a 1099. And they've put in place, we've had a couple of people that I know that are coaches of ours that are independent contractors that have businesses set up because they do multiple types of 1099 work. And it's a pretty strenuous process. They're, you know, wanting to make sure you have a business account set up. They're asking, you know, every bank, and Todd, you can probably attest to this from what you've heard, every bank is kind of asking for a little bit different information. So the nuances to the youth sports world are trying to help your coaches who might not be full-time employees find out what relief they can get. And through the PPP, it might be a little tough. Depending on the state, they can file for unemployment because they've opened up unemployment to independent contractors as well, which is the first time they've ever done that. Unfortunately, because of the mass of people that are applying as standard employees filing for unemployment, they haven't even gotten the process for unemployed independent contractors to even start to apply for it. So those are some of the nuances that as a youth sports organization, we've had to kind of try and work our way through. And I still don't have definitive answers either on the independent contractors applying for PPP or the unemployment, because they just haven't been able to get far enough down that process yet. So.
That's great. And I'll add to that, that from my understanding, from an employer standpoint, if you do have 1099 contractors, that what you paid to those contractors previously does count in the calculation toward your overall loan amount, but it will not count toward what is forgiven at the end of the 8-week period. Only your employee costs are counted towards that.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem that we've had is we had heard definitively, you know, from a couple of people that you could not include the 1099s in that original calculation. And the difficult part me is that if you do, and you get a loan for that amount, you're then getting a loan for much more than you can get forgiveness. And on the back end, you'll end up with a pretty substantial, depending on the size of your 1099 workforce, a substantial piece that you can't get forgiven, which seems like a lot because then you're going to have this outstanding loan. But when you really think about it, it's a 2-year loan at 1% interest. It's almost free money.
Yep.
So if you are able to include them in your calculation and get approved, you know, it's a good thing because that money isn't going to really cost you much over the next couple of years.
Yep. And then the final interesting part when I was getting everything together was we asked our advisors and I did a bunch of research on what actually goes into that calculation for computing your average payroll cost per month. And I think I got 4 or 5 different answers.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I read the guidance from the SBA and made my own interpretation and didn't run into any issues after that.
Good. Yeah. You were lucky to only get 4 or 5. I probably get 11 or 12.
Thank you guys. Thanks, Todd. Thanks, Steve. That was helpful. And just to call out a comment from Scott Anderson, Highland baseball, softball isn't applying because they're entirely volunteer based and own their field, so don't have rent. Yeah. So that's kind of it, right? It's like, that doesn't mean there aren't challenges, you know, financially. It's just, but the program doesn't pick you up in the same way. Great. Well, I think we'll leave that topic, and I think we probably have time to dive into 1 or 2 more. Please, this is a great chance. If you do have a topic we haven't covered today that you want us to dive into, please throw it in the chat. Make sure it's to all panelists and attendees, or raise your hand. while we see if anyone does that, I think let's move to, so there was a question about, with return to play dates unknown, are clubs moving forward with registration, and how are they adapting their process? Really interesting question, probably a lot of different angles you could take on that one. Does anyone have a take on that? So, in other words, like it probably depends a lot on the sport here, and what part of your season you're in, coming up to it, ending it, whatever that is. But does anyone have a take on that and how that could be managed?
Well, we're getting a lot of interest in regards to the sport fee insurance to offer that for the clubs are offering that to their parents. They're either taking out a policy and including that to offer confidence to everybody that commits to their program, or they're encouraging the parents to purchase it because it covers things like job loss, job relocation, sickness, illness, injuries, which, is a needed thing when financial situations are so volatile right now. So we're seeing a lot of clubs inquiring, wanting it, trying to get registrations out right now, encouraging parents to go ahead and register and get the insurance.
I've talked to a couple of clubs. One was a baseball program that's mid-season. And they were having parents asking for refunds. And instead of refunding everything, given that they're not quite sure what spring and summer is going to look like, they refunded the volunteer fee. So in that particular club, everybody pays a volunteer fee of somewhere between $250, $300. And at the end of their year season, you get the money back if you did your volunteer service for the club. That money they're refunding now as sort of a good faith effort to keep people engaged and not hold on to that. I've talked to some other clubs that that are sort of at the front end of their registration periods, where instead of having a year-round fee, they're chunking it up into like a spring summer fee that's less because the programming is less. Maybe they're doing some online things or some education things, but not a whole lot on the field or the court. And then able to adjust those fees fall, winter going forward, when in fact they have field rental, referee fees, those sorts of things. So breaking up their normal annual fee into chunks that are more reflective, both of the programs and the services they offer and of their expenses. Because hopefully you're not having to pay for field rental if you can't be out there.
Hey, Chris, we're mid-season. So we have, for the most part, our 6-month volleyball season is a half to 2/3 of the way through. So we're not taking new registrations already for, next season because we're still 6 months off. But we have basically put on hold any registrations for all of our summer camps because, number one, we don't know when we can start them. And number two, we don't know what they'll look like. We might have a maximum number of kids of 25 that we can put in the gym, or 10, and we might have to section off into much more of a 10-person groups for an hour or two, and another 10-person group and another 10-person group versus 25 to 50 or 100 kids being in the gym. So we've just decided to hold off until we get some direction as to how and when we can come back before we start funneling those registrations out. And Jennifer, one follow-up question in regards to the insurance. We've used that insurance before, and one of the things we looked into, but that is not covered, is a situation like this where there's a government or a force majeure type of event.
Yeah.
Parents cannot get a refund based on this type of event.
Correct. It's not going to apply for a season canceling. It has to apply for the specific things that are covered, which
Right.
would be, a season-ending injury. There's short-term injury, illness. But if there's a national pandemic, a worldwide pandemic, then that would not be what's covered. And really, right now, that's because of organizations and leagues and tournaments are canceling the event. That wouldn't be something that would be covered anyway.
Right.
But job loss,
Yep.
job relocation, illness, all of those things are going to be real issues coming up over the next
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're in a tough position. We are a year-round program, but we we pay our tournament fees for the summer. We do about 30 plus tournaments. So we paid out 70 grand in tournament fees going into this summer, but we collect tournament fees this month and next month, and therefore we're not collecting. So that's going to be what's going to do us in is, the tournaments don't want to refund. They're going to do anything to not refund us. We know that. They're going to change dates. The problem is the dates they're selecting are dates that our parents most likely won't be able to go to anyways. So we're in a situation of a cash flow of we think it's smart to pay the tournaments off in the fall, in the winter, and we have to because that's how you get into the tournaments. They ask you by a certain date to register, and then we ask our parents for cash flow reasons to pay that off in the spring going into the summer. And now we're kind of stuck in that situation where we don't want to charge our parents. We're in good faith to them. We're just trying to do what's the best thing for our parents. I don't know if these tournaments are going to happen. So we're in a sticky situation of, do we keep charging, which right now we're not going to. We're freezing payments starting Wednesday. And how are we going to deal with the tournaments? And maybe, bless their hearts, they might actually refund us, and then we could get that money to help with our cash flow situation. So I don't know. We have some tournament vendors in here. It's an interesting dynamic because the people in my program this year might not be in my program in the fall. They might leave. They might graduate out of the program because they're moving on to college. So it's a sticky situation, and I'm just trying to get feedback on maybe how to handle those situations where it kind of disrupts everything there, and we're kind of at the mercy of tournaments.
I was talking to assistant DOC whose club runs a really large soccer tournament, and they had managed to be able to play the first weekend of their tournament. It's a multiple weekend event, and then we're closed down by their state stay at home, and they had collected, it's an expensive tournament. They had collected a lot of money, but they'd also spent a lot of money preparing for the tournament and those sorts of things. And they were not going to give refunds at all. And I asked, I thought, if I were a team wanting to go, I might not be too happy about losing over $1,000 for a tournament. And he said, yeah, well, the business of that particular tournament is we have such a long waiting list, it won't matter. Someone else will fill in. And I was really torn between reacting to, that's a lot of money to lose for a team. And I don't know if it's reality or arrogance of, well, someone else will take your place. But it was a hard message to hear.
Yeah, I'll just say I'm taking notes on how people are handling it with us for future tournaments, because we want to do right by our customers, and, we're going to have to make some really big sacrifices. And, my argument to some of the tournaments is like, hey, look, you should have to make sacrifices too here. Especially some of the tournaments we gave them over 30 grand, and they're not going to pay college coaches now. They're not going to pay staff to work. They're not going to pay for the fields. They might if they push a tournament off, but I still don't think they're going to happen this summer with people traveling all over the East Coast and all over the Midwest. So they are going to save money. So, it's tough for me to say. I understand keeping some of it, but the strict no refund. And then we looked at insurance too, but if this tournament gets canceled, it's not going to cover the families.
Yeah, tournament insurance is different. And I used to run tournaments from a soccer standpoint. And I will tell you, there are definitely upfront costs that you have. But if a tournament is canceled, there are certainly costs that you don't have. Referee fees. I mean, your upfront cost is going to be sanctioning, the governing body, the medals, trophies, stuff like that, the scheduler. But a lot of the costs you do not have. So for any tournament that is saying they're not going to offer any refund at all, to me, arrogance is the word that's coming to my mind. I think it's a dangerous business.
Cory, I can speak as a tournament operator. We have a big one coming up that we've collected a significant amount of money in terms of the registration fees. And our philosophy is, yes, that's one that kind of helps our club run for the entire season. But at the same point, we're fortunate enough that we've been able to recover most of them. And we're still in a position where we're trying to run it. We know it's going to be reduced. But Ruth, to your point too, it is kind of arrogance to say we aren't going to give any refunds. Our philosophy is we're going to give every penny back that we can. Yes, there's some administrative costs and that we've sunk into it. So we might keep a very nominal piece of it to try and not cover it, but help with that. But we're going to give 80, 90% at minimum back to the teams that are participating. It's just not right to keep that money.
I think that
Yeah.
goes to what Cory was saying too, is like, this is, we're all in this together long term. This is going to blow over. We're all going to keep doing youth sports. This is stuff going to keep happening. But if you ruin those relationships because you are a jerk to somebody and decide you're just going to charge them a full fee, even though it might put the organization under or destroy their cash flow, people will remember that. So it's just kind of like everybody, your human interactions. You got to treat people like people and just realize we're all in this together. And the people that are fair are the ones that are going to keep doing business and be even better when we come out of this,
Yeah, Scott has a
Yeah,
different.
That's what I was going to do. Thanks, Ruth.
Was that what you're going to do?
Yeah, I was going to bring Scott in here. So.
His comment here in the chat, for those of you, our situation is a bit different in that we already registered 800 baseball and softball players. They ordered the uniforms and paid a variety of other costs that can't be recovered. If they can't play, we're going to have big decisions with regard to refunds. And he's curious, how are other programs dealing with refund requests, specifically refund requests right now?
I think from an organization standpoint, that's a little bit different than a tournament. From an organization standpoint, if you've ordered their uniforms, you have costs out. I think a lot of clubs are wanting to engage the players. That's why they're doing Zoom. That's why they're trying to keep that content up and the communication going between the parents, coaches, and players, the organization, so that you can not have to refund the parents, because there's no definite that the season's over. I think baseball too, you have a lot more social distancing opportunities than some other sports as well. So I think you can't really answer those questions until there's any type of plan in place of when we all go back to somewhat normal. I mean, we just don't know the timeline yet.
Kelly?
Yeah, I was going to say, in our area, we, as directors of coaching, we met with each other as far as our soccer clubs are concerned, and talked with each other and said that we were all going to offer our current kids a spot back with all of our programs. And then we were going to give a portion of, whatever the money is that was left over, because obviously the spring season, we're still working a little bit, right? But we're all going to give them credit towards the next season. That's kind of how we've decided as a whole to handle things. I'm not sure, like, I agree with everybody, like there's going to be people who just can't afford to come back. I mean, and how will we handle that, right? That's going to be a big question mark, and hopefully all of us can put our heads together and help each other. But I'm interested to hear, because I'm in the same boat that Cory is with the tournaments as well. Very frustrating. So I'm with you on that one. I have no answers, but I'm with you.
Yeah. All right. But same thing that Kelly's doing too is if I put a podcast out to my program this morning saying, hey, we'll freeze your payments right now. But if you choose to keep paying, I'll pay that forward to the next year. And we're probably not going to do tryouts. So we're probably going to keep them in the program. And if you help us stay afloat in the future, we'll pay that back by removing some of your future fees for supporting us and keeping your payment plans going.
Right. You need cash now. So, yeah.
Everybody's going to have to handle it differently based on their business model. We've gathered a bunch of the clubs in our area, and we're having ongoing conversations to try and approach it somewhat similarly if we can. But there are going to be some clubs that they have to give refunds back. They might not make it through to next season. So I'm hearing a lot of discussion about credits for next season. We're in a unique situation because we had a season that was just starting the day we went into lockdown. So for those teams, we've been holding out hope that we could at least get a modified or abbreviated season. And if not, we most likely are going to give, if not all, just keep a very small bit, but give a full refund, because there was really no service provided on that type of situation. We did buy uniforms, but they are uniforms we're looking at and saying we could potentially use them next season. So that cost isn't lost to us. For the teams that are halfway or 2/3 of the way through the season, we have had a very minimal, maybe I can count on two hands how many requests we've had for refunds so far, because people are holding out hope that they can get back in. We've basically communicated, we can't do anything refund-wise until we can look in the rearview mirror and see what the season looked like. Were we able to start back up? Were we able to do anything? But at that point, we'll look at what were our sunk costs, how much of the season did we get in, and we'll be able to offer, I think, something back. And we're going to potentially, we haven't worked through it all yet, but give a mix of refund and credit, or give an option, and maybe even incentivize someone that, hey, if you do take this as a credit, we'll give you a 5% incentive. Let's say you had a $500 credit coming, we'll give you $525 in a credit. to give them a little bit of a bonus to entice them to try and stay on, because there's so many programs we offer that they could take advantage of that with. So we're trying to come up with ways that are flexible, because if we have a $1,000 refund someone's asking for, they might not want to take all of that as a credit, but if we offered it to them 50-50, they might be willing to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we're still working through that because we haven't been faced with it yet, but those are some of the things we're looking at.
Yeah, those are good points. I mean, it's like you said, Steve, it's going to be different for everyone. I know, we've heard a good number of people trying to do their best to deliver some sort of programming, even if it looks different. And, this is maybe a little too idealistic, but I really think a lot of it comes down to communication too, like making sure those parents who can afford, those families who can afford to be out the money, if they understand what it really means for your organization, if they ask for a full refund and everyone does that, I think you've got an opportunity to kind of play on the reality of the situation, come clean with the parents and say, hey, literally, this is what this means if everyone does this. And I'm not saying it's realistic for everyone to say, oh yeah, just take my money regardless, right? For many of them, obviously it's not, but hopefully there's a good percentage who kind of get the situation and want to keep the club afloat so that when things smooth over, their son or daughter has a place to play that they like and are familiar with next season. And I know we're a few minutes over time here. I think that's probably a good stopping point. Thank you to my fellow panelists for jumping on and sharing some ideas today. Thanks for everyone for attending. We're going to keep doing these. We're winging it here. We started doing this. This is our third week. We're going to keep doing it. What really, really helps us is if you do come back, we've had a lot of repeat attendees every week. If you do come back and you register, please, you'll get an email with a form just to submit a few questions or topics. That helps us a lot. Part of the unstructured nature of this is great, but it also means sometimes we're kind of like, okay, where do we go next? So the more you can jump in and give us topics or ideas, questions, the better this is going to be if we can structure it and kind of guide the conversation a little bit. So we'll end there. Have a great weekend, everyone, and thanks again for joining.
Thanks for inviting me in.